but gradually the dull sound became louder and seemed to be wafted towards us by a gust of air. Then it seemed to be further off again, and almost to die away, and again to get louder. There is no other earthly sound like it. A thunderstorm as it dies away is the only thing that could suggest the impression we felt. It sends a kind of shiver all over the surface of the body. Even our horses felt it. Their three heads were raised uneasily, their eyes shone in the twilight, and they snorted noisily through their dilated nostrils. Leaning out, I saw the heads of the Territorials thrust out of the windows. They, too, had heard the mysterious and stirring music. No one spoke or joked. Their bodies, stretching out into space, seemed to be asking questions and imploring to know the truth. We came nearer to the sounds of the guns, and could now distinguish the shots following one another at short intervals. The air seemed to be shaken, and we might have thought we were but a few paces off. The train had pulled up sharply in the open country. It was still light enough for us to make out the landscape: meadows covered with long pale grass, bordered by willows and tall poplar trees gently swaying in the evening breeze. In the background a thick wood shut in the view. The railway line curved away to the right and was lost to view in the growing darkness. Now that the train was motionless, the impressive voice of the cannon could be heard more distinctly. The long luminous trails of the searchlights passed over the sky at intervals. Impatient at the delay, I got down and walked along the line to the engine. It had stopped at a level crossing. At the side of the closed barrier, on the doorstep of her hut, with the light shining upon her, sat the wife of the gatekeeper, a child in her arms. She was a young woman, fair and pale. She seemed somewhat uneasy, and yet had no idea of quitting her post. She was talking in a low voice to the engine driver and stoker of our train. I tried to get some information from her. "Mon Dieu, monsieur," she said, "I know nothing, except that the guns have been firing all day long since yesterday, and even at times during the night. The sound comes chiefly from the direction of G. Some soldiers who went by just now with carts told me the Prussians got into the town yesterday, but that it was to be retaken to-day, and that there were a great many dead and wounded." My hopes revived a little. I saw at once in my mind the German attack stopped on the River Oise, our armies recovering, drawing together, and driving the enemy back across the frontier. Our engine driver explained to me that we had come quite close to the terminus, but that we should have to wait some time before we could get in. Other trains had to be unloaded and shunted to make room. I went back to my van. Night had fallen, and it must have been about 9 o'clock. The guns had suddenly ceased firing. Our lantern had burnt itself out, and the rest of our wait was made more tedious by the darkness. An empty train passed us, and then silence fell once more upon the spot where we waited anxiously to be allowed to go forwards towards our brothers in arms. Oh, how we longed to join them, even if it were only in the middle of a bloody and difficult retreat. How I longed to be delivered from my solitude. At last, at about 11 o'clock, the train set off again without whistling, and very, very slowly. It went along timidly, so to speak, and as though it were afraid of coming into unknown region, which might be full of mysteries and ambuscades. In the distance I saw some signal lamps waved, and suddenly we were stopped. What I then saw astounded me. I had thought we should draw up to a large platform, where gangs of men would be waiting in perfect order to unload the train, sort out the packages, and pile them up in appointed places for the carts to take them quietly away. Instead of this, the train stopped at some little distance from a small station standing by itself in the open country. I could make out some buildings, badly lighted, and around them a crowd of shadowy forms moving about. And drawn up alongside of our train were countless vehicles of all sorts and kinds in indescribable disorder, made all the more confusing by the darkness. Some of them were drawn up in a sort of a line. Others tried to edge themselves in and get a vacant place amongst the entanglement of wheels and horses. The drivers were abusing each other in forcible language. Every now and again there was an outburst of laughter interspersed with oaths. All this time Officials were running down the platform with papers in their hands, trying to read what was chalked on the vans. Inquiries and shouts were heard. "Where is the bread?" "Over here." "No, it's not." "Where is the officer in charge?" Matches were struck. The few lighted lanterns there were snatched from one hand by another. And in spite of all this apparent disorder the work went rapidly forward. Men climbed in through the open doors. Sacks and heavy cases were passed along. Porters, bending under their loads, slipped through the maze of vans and carts to the one they wanted and deposited their burdens. After giving Wattrelot orders to prevent anyone from invading our horse box, I slipped out and went towards the station office to look for the military commissary. I had great difficulty in making my way through the crowd of men, who seemed to be rushing to take the train by assault in the darkness. Then I had to avoid the breaking of my neck in getting across the maze of rails, the signal wires and the open ditches. I got to the station. A number of wounded were there lying on the platforms, about 100 of them, with their clothes torn and covered with dust. They presented a sad picture. They were, it is true, only slightly wounded, but it cuts one to the heart to see soldiers in that plight, hauled out upon the ground, without straw to lie upon or any doctor to attend to them. However, they had all had first-aid dressings. Below the bandages that bound their heads, their feverish eyes gleamed in the light of the lanterns. Their bandaged arms were supported by pieces of linen tied behind their necks. Several of them were sitting on baskets, casks and packages of all kinds, and they were talking eagerly. Each man was relating, with plenty of gesticulation, the great deeds he had taken part in or seen. As I passed I heard scraps of their conversation. They were in the first line of houses. Then, old chap, our lieutenant rushed forward. You should have seen them scuttle. I was delighted to see that the morale of these fine fellows didn't seem to be the least affected. To hear them, you would have thought the Germans had been driven back at all points. I got a porter to tell me where the military commissary was. He pointed out an artillery lieutenant in a cap with a white band, talking with a group of officers. I introduced myself and asked him if he knew anything about the state of affairs. Like everybody else, he could only give me the very vague information. "However," he added, "I can confirm what you have heard about G. The first corps has just retaken the town, which was defended by the Prussian Guard. It appears that our fellows were wonderful and that the enemy has suffered enormous losses. However," the lieutenant's voice trembled slightly, and a shrug of his shoulders betrayed his despair, "I have orders to evacuate the station, with all my men and my papers. So soon as the last train has been unloaded, I am to fall backwards towards L. How is one to understand what all this means?" We looked at each other without a word. Everybody felt dejected and doubtful. Not to understand. To have to obey without understanding why. It was the first time I had really felt the grandeur of military service. You must have a soul stoutly tempered to carry out an order, no matter what, even if that order seems incomprehensible to you. There must have been in that corner of France, on the edge of that frontier which we had sworn never to be violated, there must have been thousands of officers, thousands of soldiers who would have given their lives rather than yield up 1 inch of ground. Then why abandon that station? Why say so bluntly, "To-morrow you will have no need to go so far north to bring supplies. We shall come nearer to you. We shall withdraw"? There I was again, allowing my mind to wander and to suffer. I tried to learn by what means I could get some information about my regiment. "Well, it's very simple," said the artillery lieutenant very kindly. "Your commissariat officer will certainly have come with this convoy to fetch supplies. Try to get hold of him. He will tell you all about it." I grasped his hand and went off, glad indeed at the thought of seeing my regiment's uniform once more. And Providence seemed to guide me, for I thought I saw the very man I was looking for in the little booking office. But I had some difficulty in recognising him. He looked aged and worn. His beard had grown quite grey. Bending over the sill of the ticket office, he was in the act of spreading the contents of a box of sardines upon a slice of bread. Yes, it was he. How tired and disheartened he looked! I pushed open the door and rushed in. Bonjour, comment va?